Get started. All right, so hopefully you can see my screen and everything's working well. So my name is Kai Davis. I am a forestry master's student here at UK, and today I'm going to be talking about some wildlife sounds and introducing some birds. So every time I'm invited on, I do a different color theme for birds. And this time it'll be our first multicolor birds. So we have like a black or grayish and orange bird. So there's two. So one is going to be a local bird that you'll find throughout the year around here. Then the other one is going to be a migratory bird that you'll find around the time that I'm doing this. So it's obviously July, so it'll be a bird that you'll find around this time. But anyway, um, woohoo, my cool little animation. All right, so welcome and let's get started. So the first bird, like I said, is local, and this is going to be the call that you'll hear. All right. So this is typically going to be the location that you'll find it, but this bird that I'm showing is going to be found pretty everywhere. So if you do know it, put it in the chat. If not, I'm about to reveal it. So this is actually the American robin. Um, So for the mnemonic, the way to recognize a robin call is going to be kind of like a cheerily, cheer up, cheer up, cheerily, cheerily. And that's kind of what you hear. And it's kind of like that swooping up call. So I'll go ahead and play it for you again so you can hear it. All right, so hopefully you heard it. So that's going to be an American robin, and like I said, you'll pretty much see these everywhere. So anyway, let's learn some more about this bird, this American robin. So going into the life history and behavior of the American robin, um, they're pretty industrious birds, and they're bounding across lawns. That's primarily where you'll see them, right next to the sidewalks, just hopping around. Like I said, they're pretty much found everywhere around here. And then during the fall and winter, the robins will often roost in groups in large flocks, and then they'll spend most of their times in trees. However, in the springtime and in the that's where we start to see the males starting to attract the females, and we'll start to see them lower on the ground more so, and they display certain mating behaviors, trying to attract them, which includes like shaking their wings and inflating their throats, singing. So you'll start to hear more singing in the springtime too. And then it's kind of cute when they find their pairs. The male and female will do a display together where they're opening their mouths and hop towards each other, and then they'll like rub their bills together. So it's kind of cute to see that and to see the mating and attraction kind of work in the wild. And then they're also strong, straight, fast flyers too. So in terms of their diet, they eat different types of food depending on the time of day. So more earthworms in the morning, and then more fruit later on in the day. Um, they eat large numbers of both invertebrates and fruit. And particularly in the spring and summer, they eat large numbers of earthworms as well as insects and snails. But later on in the years, they'll start to eat more fruit, which include berries and things like that. And then one study even suggested that they try to supplement and get a round diet based on what they're eating. So they'll try and eat fruits with bugs in them. So they're kind of smart like that. In terms of their habitat and location, in this map, it shows where they're found. So, like I said, everywhere around here. So you can see them all across North America, which is really interesting. It's a super common bird around here. Um, they're pretty familiar in towns and cities, but they're also found in like wider areas too. And that includes mountain forests and even the Alaskan wilderness, which I thought was pretty interesting. Just imagining seeing a robin that I would see in my yard, also being found in like Alaskan wilderness. And then during the winter, many of robins may move to like moist woods where more berry producing trees and shrubs are found. So they're found all across the continent in gardens, parks, yards, golf courses, fields, tundras, forests, shrublands, all around. Um, so within conservation and the threats, um, robins, they forest largely on lawns, so they can be quite vulnerable to pesticide poisoning, and they can be an important indicator for chemical pollution as well as other urban environmental issues. So we kind of heard about that with like Silent Spring, with Carson's book. And part of the reason why it's called Silent Spring is because of all the birds that ended up dying, and there weren't as many birds calling. And that birds like the robin are going to be the ones that are going to be calling in the spring that they would no longer hear them. So they're a good indicator for urban environmental issues. Like I said, they're numerous and widespread, and their population are around like 370 million. And they've slightly increased about 0.13% every year from 1966 to 2019. And then lastly, some fun facts about the robin. They eat a lot of fruit in the fall and winter, like I said. And then when they eat honeysuckle berries exclusively, sometimes they can become a little intoxicated. So that's kind of funny that this robin can get a little drunk sometimes. And then the saying of the early bird gets the worm is kind of from the American robin. Their rich caroling and song is primarily what you're going to hear first at dawn, right at first light. So, and they eat worms too. So that's kind of where that early bird gets the worm comes from. And then it's also interesting that like Western populations are a little bit different in coloration than the Eastern populations. So Western are often a little bit more pale than the Eastern populations. So that is the American robin. Next up, I almost gave away the answer, but this is the next one. You'll primarily find it in the picture that I'm showing. So here we go. All right, so this is the Baltimore Oriole. And this one is a little difficult to identify. I'm still new at identifying some of these birds. This one is still one that I'm trying to train myself to listen to out in the wild. And there's not really a mnemonic for the Baltimore Oriole, at least I haven't seen or heard one. But their songs are described to be like clean and flowy and like whistling. And then there's like a series of paired notes within it that you might hear, and that lasts like a 1 to 2 seconds. And it's kind of fluty, so you'll kind of hear that flute. But then it's kind of specific. There aren't many birds around here that are going to sound too similar to an oriole, but it's definitely one that I'm still getting used to hearing. But I'll play it again for you all. So yeah, it's a bunch of different calls too. So it's really interesting. Like I said, but we'll learn it together and we'll figure it out. But anyway, let's learn some more about this Baltimore Oriole. So first, if it decides to work, maybe. All right, there we go. All right, so going into the life history and behavior of the Baltimore Oriole, I'm showing this picture and it looks a little different from what we're seeing here. And that's because this picture now is a female. So one of the interesting things about this one is that the male and female have sex-specific colors. So the male is going to be displaying more of this vibrant orange chest color and a black back and top, while the female is going to be more yellow, orange, and gray wings. So that's kind of interesting with their life history. And in terms of singing, the male sings to establish and defend a breeding territory. So you may not hear a full song if you're outside of the breeding grounds or outside of the breeding time period. And then the female Baltimore Oriole, they also sing. Their songs are a bit shorter. And occasionally mating pairs will sing a duet. So that's kind of cool. Um, and then also in Central North America, the populations of the Baltimore Oriole overlaps with the Bullock's Oriole. And they can kind of confuse bird watchers because they look pretty similar. Um, and then what is even more confusing is that they can breed, crossbreed between those two particular species. And then they produce a hybrid offspring that is brighter than a typical Bullock's, but it is darker and more dull than a typical Baltimore Oriole. And that's just completely confusing because we don't really know like which one is it, and it's just a hybrid offspring. Um, there are many birds that defend large territories, but orioles aren't necessarily a big defensive bird that defend large swaths of their territory. So we can see a lot of different orioles eating together and things like that. Um, so going into their diet, so unlike robins, they prefer more ripe and dark colored fruits, which is pretty interesting. And then beyond fruit, they also eat insects and nectar. And then their food proportion varies throughout the season. So in the summertime, while they're breeding and feeding their young, much of their diet is going to consist of insects, which are more protein and needed for the growth. And then in the spring and fall, we start to see more nectar and ripe fruits in their diet because these sugary foods are readily converted into fats, which can be stored and used for the migration when they're traveling. Um, they also eat a wide variety of insects, so beetles, crickets, grasshoppers, even small other small invertebrates. But they can also be considered pest species. Because they can damage fruit crops. Like I said, they eat a lot of fruits. So any of those raspberries, cherries, oranges, and bananas, they can damage some of those crops and things like that. All right. So going into the habitat, they're found mainly high and leafy deciduous trees, but not necessarily in deep forests. So like the picture I showed earlier, it was just like a common park that you would find like throughout the city, but it's going to be more old growth forest within the city. So they like that. They're usually found high in those trees. So they like open woodlands, forest edges, orchards, stands across rivers and in parks and in backyards even. They've adapted well to human settlement, so that's why we can start to see them feeding and nesting in the parks and orchards and backyards. Um, so now in terms of migration, so in this picture, you can see this is their wintering, the blue at the bottom, and then their migration is going to be the yellow, where they're traveling through, and then the kind of orange or red, depending on how your screen displays it, is going to be where their breeding grounds are. So you can see Lexington, which is primarily like right here. We're going to be right in that that breeding ground. So they're medium to long distance migrants, and they migrate in flocks. They typically spend the summer and winter in different ranges, like I said. So around early April to late May, they start to arrive in their breeding grounds in that red. Um, and then as early as July to August, they'll start to travel back down to their wintering grounds down here. So we're right on the tail end of their time here in their breeding grounds. So this will be your last chance to see them in this year if you can. So yeah, that's kind of cool. So get out there if you can. And then their conservation and threats. Their population has been declining about 0.84% per year. And it's a cumulative decline of like 36% during 1966 to 2019. But their global population is still at 12 million, so their species are relatively low conservation concern. And some of the threats that they face because they breed in North America in winter and Central and South America, they're vulnerable to deforestation and habitat loss. And then insecticides can also affect them indirectly by what they're eating, the insect that they prey on, but then they can also be poisoned directly by the insecticides. They also migrate at night, so they can be disoriented by lights and rainstorms and things like that. And they can crash into tall structures like skyscrapers or radio towers. And then lastly, one fun fact that I have, the Baltimore Oriole gets their name from their colors. It's actually from the Baltimore family in England, Old England, who displayed their family crest colors of this. So they got their name from that family. And coincidentally, it's also how Baltimore, Maryland got their name from that same family of England. But yeah, so that is all today. So today we have the American Robin and the Baltimore Oriole. So thank you.